Let's take a look at this example. This time we have to solve this formula for AV. AV we have in the numerator of the fraction and in the denominator of the fraction. So we have to eliminate the fraction in order to pull out AVs from the fraction. How I can do that? By multiplying both sides of the formula by the denominator. Okay, let me copy this formula one more time. So I have AV prime is equal AV over 1 plus B AV. I said we have to multiply both sides equation by the denominator. 1 plus beta AV. And I have 1 plus beta AV. Okay, 1 plus beta AV is going to cancel out. And I'm going to have 1 plus beta AV times AV prime equals AV. Okay, we have AV on both sides of the equation, but one of them is inside of the parentheses. In order to pull out AV from the parentheses, I have to first distribute AV prime into the parentheses. Why? Because I want to eliminate the parentheses. AV prime times 1 is AV prime plus beta AV prime. AV prime is going to be multiplied by beta AV. That's why I'm going to get B AV prime equals AV. Next, I have to collect all AVs on one side, and every single term which is not AV, I have to move to the other side. Now I have AV over here and I have AV over here. I'm going to take this AV and move to the left side. AV prime, I'm going to move to the right side. That's why I'm going to have B or beta AV prime minus AV is equal negative AV prime. Okay, now I'm going to factorize AV. Okay, that's why I'm going to have AV, and inside of the parentheses I'm going to have everything whatever left. So I'm going to have beta times AV prime minus 1. Someone is going to ask me why we have 1. Remember, anytime we have no integer next to the variable, okay, I'm supposed to say not visible integer next to the variable, there is always invisible 1. Okay, if you are going to take this AV, okay, and you're going to factorize and you're going to write on the front of the parentheses, this invisible 1 becomes visible. That's why I have 1 over here. Equals minus AV prime. I'm looking for AV. AV is multiplied to the parentheses. I do not want to have parentheses next to AV. That's why I'm going to divide both sides equation by the parentheses. That's why I'm going to have B AV prime minus 1 over here. And I'm going to have also B AV prime minus 1 over here. Parentheses and parentheses will cancel out. So I'm going to have equation looking like this. AV equals negative AV prime over beta AV prime minus 1. Okay? Someone is going to say, okay, this is the final answer. We can say, okay, but we can go a little bit further than that. Okay, so remember, we can always write the parentheses over here. Okay, and I'm going to have AV equals. Now, remember, this is negative number, and in the denominator, we have positive number. Negative divided by positive will give me negative. Okay? So just keep in mind that if I'm going to change the position of this negative, I'm going to take this negative and I'm going to put in the denominator and this positive in the numerator. It's not going to change my final answer. That's why I can write this prime like AV prime over negative beta AV prime minus 1, because it's the same thing in this case, because positive divided by negative will give me negative. Next, I'm going to multiply this negative by every single term inside of the parentheses. That's why I'm going to have AV equals AV prime over negative times BAV becomes negative BAV prime, and negative times negative gives me positive. That's why my terms in the parentheses are going to look like this. 1 minus BAV prime. Okay? As you can see, we eliminate the negative from the numerator. Okay? So this is the solution to my problem.